And thank you so much to Papier for inviting me. It is a pleasure to be here, and thank you for everybody who's watching. It's a particularly beautiful day out, so if you're watching this, it means you're very interested in Canadian art and art education. And I'm going to talk to you about how I became involved in this subject and how I created a website called the Art Canada Institute, which is all about making Canadian art history a contemporary conversation. And my journey into art and art education began about 10 years ago. I was a PhD student at the University of Toronto. And while I was a PhD student, I was teaching. And one of the things I discovered is that the libraries of Canadian art, it looked like this. People would go, I would tell students, go do research, and they would come to this sort of situation in the library. Or in galleries, they would find spaces like this, or they would not know about in museums and galleries that there were so many fantastic works of Canadian art that were in the vaults that were not accessible to them. And this explains something to me, which is that when I would be teaching art history at U of T, I was teaching a very big class that was called Art from 1900 to the Present. And I always wanted to bring Canadian art into any lesson, any lecture that I was giving. So if I was teaching a class on pop art, I wanted to bring Michael Snow or Joyce Wheelan into the class. If I was teaching a class on color field art, I would want to bring Jack Bush into the conversation. But I continuously found that most of my students could not name even 3 or 4 Canadian artists. And I know that everybody who's watching can name many, many more. But the reality is that there was a poll done 3 years ago, a major Canadian poll, and most Canadians cannot name 2 Canadian artists, even though there is Canadian art on our money. Bill Reed's on there. On the Vimy Ridge Monument is on there. And I wondered, why is this the situation? And in so many ways, it is the situation because of art and art education. And in some ways, the situation is historical. And it goes a bit like this, is that museums, once upon a time, it was enough to put great works up on the walls. And here you're looking at a Dutch master painting and people would come. And here's another version of you'd put the work out and people would come. But we're no longer living in a world where that is the case. Well, we're no longer living in a world where there's an accessibility to museums. And so what I wanted to think about was, how do we make art, and particularly Canadian art, accessible to the broadest possible audience? And I realized that when I did my PhD, I was doing it at a stage where I'd already had a career working in publishing, in graphic design, and all of a sudden I was in a classroom with students who are about 15 years younger than I was. And so what they would say is they were not going to a library to find books on Canadian art. If they wanted to find information, where they would go is to their phones to look for images like this. So I'm going to go back, and I thought, what if I was able to take this image, looking at a library stacks, and then create a virtual library on Canadian art and art history? If I thought, what would happen if we created a canon of Canadian art and art history that one could access on our phones? Really, it would be something of a revolution. And I'm happy to say that in many ways has come to pass, because the Art Canada Institute is now 7 years old. We have an audience of more than 1 million. We have published over 40 books, and we have come to be the go-to resource on Canadian art and art history. And I will tell you something, our work is really just beginning. And what we are all about is making Canadian art history a contemporary conversation. So our goal is to bring Canadian art and art education to the broadest audience possible. Everything that we publish at the Art Canada Institute is available in both French and English, and all of the work that we produce is available free of charge. And so for our audience, what that means is that if they type into a Google search engine, artist Canada pop art, they will end up on our Michael Snow book or our Joyce Whelan book. Or if they type in artist Canada Quebec, they may end up on our Riopelle book or our Bourdois book. But something that has shown a continued metric of our success is that now, if one enters into Google a Canadian artist name and we have done a book on it, our book usually is ranking higher than Wikipedia or a museum entry. And so what it means is that there's a really robust amount of people who have an interest in Canadian art and art history. And it means that they are accessing that information through search engines and through an online way. And one of the prevailing beliefs that we had when we started the Art Canada Institute was that it's a very simple concept. There is nothing that exists in our world right now that we are not going to experience on our phone or virtually first. If you're going to go to a restaurant, you're going to check it out online first. If you're going to go be looking to, well, we're not going on trips nowadays, but if you were looking to make any kind of purchase, you're going to check it out first online. And yet, one of the things that I discovered when I started thinking about this idea for the Art Canada Institute is that there was so little educational content that was available online. So the situation really did make sense. Why aren't there more Canadians who know about our art and our history? Because there wasn't enough online. But what we have discovered at the Art Canada Institute is that every time we put a publication online, every time we publish a book, we end up hearing from university professors, curators, high school teachers, that students then have an interest in writing on that topic and learning more about that individual. And so it's a situation where once the information is made accessible, people have an interest in learning more about it, in discovering their own heritage. And so that is why I said that there is lots of work that we have left to do. The flagship program of the Art Canada Institute is something called the Canadian Online Art Book Project. And you can see underneath this beautiful, the banner image, it's a self-portrait of an artist named Parasceva Clark. You can see that we have a library that we have created, and every one of our books is available in the following formats: in a desktop version, a mobile version, and a PDF version. And every book is published in both English and in French. And also, every book that we have published on an artist has the following sections: the biography section, a keywork section, a style and a technique section, where to see, and sources and resources. So very importantly, all of our books, one of the other things that they do is they act as a direct link to the museums and the art institutions across the country. So in other words, what they're letting their users know is not just about Joyce Whelan, but about where to find Joyce Whelan's work. And this is something, again, that has really grown Canadian art education and has really impacted how people are understanding our cultural landscape. Sometimes people will ask, how do we decide which books we do? And the way that it's decided is that the Art Canada Institute has a commissioning board of esteemed art historians. And what they do is they look at proposals from individuals who want to write on different topics. And then, of course, the other thing that we do is we will reach out to academics, museum professionals, curators, and ask, would they be willing to write a book on a particular topic? And so, as you can imagine, this is a process that is going to be one that's very, very long in the making. Essentially, we are crafting a canon of Canadian art and Canadian art history. Another question that people ask me quite often is, did something like this exist in another country? And was the Art Canada Institute emulating another resource that existed in the world? I'm really proud to say that the answer to that is no. There wasn't anything that was a virtual library that existed in Spain or France or in the UK that we saw and we thought, oh, we should do something like that. Really, the motivation was, how do we make Canadian artists known in this country? What can we do so that when a Canadian student is asked by her professor, write an essay on a Canadian artist, how do we make it possible so that when she types into Google artist, what comes up is Joyce Wieland and not Monet or Dali or another foreign artist? What our belief is, we want people to understand the art of this country and to understand its importance and its relevance. And so by making this content, by making it available, this has come to fruition. And here is a sample of what some of our web pages look like. If you were to go into our book on Jean-Paul Lemieux, which I encourage everybody to do, you can see that the book has sections on a biography, a key work section, and so on. Here's another book on William Notman, the great Quebec photographer. So this is again what our biography section looks like. And there is a drop-down menu for every section. So it's very, very easy to use. Another thing people ask me about this educational product that we have created is have we taken a traditional print book and put it on the internet with a way of flipping pages, etc.? And the answer to that is no. We, at the Art Canada Institute, what we did was we thought about, how do people use the internet? How do people use content? How do they want to access content? And then we created an original model for that. And what that means is that every book that exists on the Art Canada Institute website is essentially a microsite of sorts. And so what that means as well is that search engine web crawlers will be going through the content of our pages and indexing it. So again, when somebody is searching for key terms related to Notman, perhaps photography, Quebec, early photo history, they will land on our page. And something that for me has been really interesting is that when I started the Art Canada Institute, I always thought people would be looking for specific topics. But in fact, most of our traffic that comes to us is through search engines, which means people often don't know exactly what they're looking for, but they will end up on our site because they're looking for key terms, go through this process of educational discovery, and often stay on this site for quite an extensive and long time. Here's a look inside the biography section. As you can see, our images are very robust. Every book also has this glossary feature. So if one, say, clicked on the word Henry Sandham, it would mean that right there, the reader is able to have access to terms, names that otherwise would mean that he or she might not be part of the conversation. And this gets to what a thing that is so key about art education. And it's something that I've experienced as an educator. And it's a very basic thing, but sometimes it's something that we forget. And it's that art education, it has to be something that everybody feels that they can take part in, that it's an accessible conversation. It's a clear conversation. There isn't a use of what I would call art speak, that it's welcoming and so forth. And another reason the Art Canada Institute came into fruition was simply because I talked to too many people who told me that they felt that art wasn't for them. It wasn't a language that they spoke. It wasn't something that they felt like they had access to. Um, but amazingly, everybody feels like they have access to online art education as long as they can get to the right places, the right sites, etc. And I'll tell you a bit about that in a few minutes. But one of the things that mattered so much to us is that there was a clarity to the content that we were producing and an accessibility. Every one of our books has a section called Key Works, which looks like this when you get to the landing page. And then when you're into it, you have an overview of the artist's work. So in other words, in our Key Works section, one is able to understand the breadth of an artist's discussion, his or her career, the key moments, key developments through a body of works. There's a significance and critical issues section, which addresses, why does this artist matter? Why should I care? Why should I be looking at his or her works? I mentioned before that everything that we do is available in French and English, which has been a really important aspect of our work, because there are so many fantastic artists who are in Western Canada who are unknown in Quebec, and fantastic Quebec artists who aren't known in Western Canada. And often it's because of a question of translation. And so we felt from the outset it was really critical that we did all of our books in French and English. There's a style and technique section in every one of our books. So one of the things that we looked at were when one wants to understand and educate about an artist, what are the key components of his or her career that people that need to be known? So it's always comes down to a key works, a significance and critical issues, what's the artist style and techniques about? And then importantly, one of the other things that we always want people to know about is about the sources and the resources, which is, where does one find writings on the artist? Where does one find the catalogs, references, film, radio? So what we offer educationally is a complete overview. And as well, we also, as I mentioned before, we are linking to other institutions in order to direct people where to see works. And so one of the things that we have found is that we have a very symbiotic relationship with museums and galleries across the country, because we are constantly directing traffic to those places. And this brings up a really interesting point about art education, which is that when I started the Art Canada Institute, I went and I spoke to many museum directors, and I said, are you doing anything like this? Because I don't want to embark upon this initiative if this is being built at museums and galleries across the country. And really pretty much across the board, what I heard was, no, this doesn't exist. And the reason is that it's important to art institutions, museums and galleries to primarily promote their own collection, what exhibitions they have going on, what works are in their own collection. And in my opinion, this has been somewhat of an oversight or a lack that has existed on Canada's cultural landscape, because there have been so many studies that have been shown that if people are introduced to art through a web presence, they are more likely to visit a bricks and mortar institution. And so in other words, if they are learning about art online, that is a first step to feeling that they belong in a visual arts institution and in that space, that they have the language. And that is why this has been such an important part of our mandate. Another thing that's an important part about the Art Canada Institute's mandate is that we really believe that part of building the cultural landscape of Canada is also making sure that people know who our leading museum professionals, who our curators are. And so in every one of our books, we will give a page that is dedicated to the artist to be able to the author to be able to explain who he or she is. Thankfully, the work of the Art Canada Institute has gone well. We have received praise from numerous publications that we are breathing life, digital life into Canadian art history, that we're the best news in Canadian art in a long time, that we're a multi-tiered resource on Canadian art and its history. And so we believe that what we're helped doing is taking institutions from being spaces that people don't necessarily know whether they belong or not, to having the level of comfort to fill them up and make the things look like this. In terms of who writes for the Art Canada Institute, it is content producers from across the country. We have over 50 authors who have contributed to the creating content for the Art Canada Institute. And something that we have begun within the last year, and that's become particularly relevant, is that we have started creating educational content specifically for high school teachers, which very soon we are now going to be turning into asynchronous learning tools. And what happened was this, is that the Art Canada Institute began to create this educational resource on Canadian artists and their history. And then we had high school teachers, secondary school teachers say, what you're doing is fantastic, but it is too sophisticated for us to be able to teach high school students, secondary, primary school students from. And so then in conjunction with the Art Canada Institute team, we thought about what we really want to do is creating teacher resource guides. And we spoke with many different, a broad range of teachers across the country. And then we developed a series of teacher resource guides that are like this, what you're seeing on screen, that are also available free of charge in both French and English on our website. And what we decided to do is we had a decision, should we create a junior version of our Emily Carr book, or should we create a junior version of our William Notman book? In other words, take what we had already created and scale it down to an audience for a younger reader. And we decided not to take that approach because what's so important right now within schools is that there's an interdisciplinary approach to learning on all subjects. And so what we want to do is we decided what we wanted to do and what would be best for students, taking the advice of educators, is to create content where students would be learning about subjects through the window of Canadian art. So for instance, learning about clear cutting through the art of Emily Carr, learning about business and entrepreneurialism through William Notman, who was a fantastic businessman, learning about Canadian identity through the art of Greg Curno, learning about art and activism through the art of General Idea, learning about women in the Second World War through the art of Molly Lamb Bobak, learning about astronomy through the art of Patterson Ewan, learning about multiculturalism through the art of William Karelic, learning about politics and social change through the art of Paul-Émile Bourdois. And these guides became very successful very, very quickly. And then COVID happened. And so now what we will be releasing in the fall is that we have taken content from these guides and we have made asynchronous learning activities that we have created for students. So students, in other words, will be able to work on activities within 45-minute segments to learn about many of the topics that I have just taken you through. And so this is one of the reasons that online learning again, is so important. We never in a million years with the Art Canada Institute would have imagined that the content we were creating 1 year ago was going to have such relevance. But what we are hearing again and again around the world is that the current pandemic that we're in is really forever changing our cultural landscape, our world, and it's spring forwarding many things that many teachers knew always that online learning was something that was important, that was relevant, but didn't necessarily have the tools to teach their students that way. What we did at the Art Canada Institute is we really have been working very hard since COVID struck in order to make our offerings more relevant than ever. This is the inside of what one of our student education guides looks like. In one page to find out about who the artist is, in another page to look at what the artist's life was like, both within the time and in relation to a cultural context. And here are some of the lessons that we are able to provide in learning activities. Here are a few more. I wanted to mention a little bit more about the Art Canada Institute and what we do. Now, this is a photo that was taken 2 years ago. We do real world events. We don't know when we will be doing real world educational events again. But I can tell you that we have recorded everything that we have done, and many of them are available on our website. So one of the ways that if you want to learn more about Canadian art and its history, it is available on our website. And here, if you go to the site, you'll see many of the lectures that we've done. A fantastic one in particular was on the relationship between Agnes Martin and Jean-Paul Riopel. That's one that we did last November. It was our last event that we did, because then the event, I'll tell you what happened about the event that we were supposed to do in March. Sometimes we also will publish our books in a print format. And it's interesting because when the Art Canada Institute started, we always were about digital education, digital art education. That was the thing that was most critical because it didn't exist. And if the Art Canada Institute publishes a print book, our reach for that print book is usually about 1,000 copies. It is just that much more difficult to get print books out into the world. It's a very small segment of the market who's buying print books compared to a book that we will release in a digital format, and we'll have an audience literally of hundreds of thousands. Here's some more of our print books, but we like print books. And we like them so much that when Kent Monkman asked the Art Canada Institute about a year ago if we would work with him to create a print edition book on his commission for the Metropolitan Museum, we agreed, and we created this wonderful book called Revision and Resistance, which is available in a traditional book format. But I wanted to show you this in particular, not just to plug the recent work of the Art Canada Institute, but also to say that right now there's such a small amount of publishing that is taking place on Canadian art and art history, that in many ways, I would love to say that Kent approached us because of the fantastic quality of our digital work. But in many ways, one of the things that he noticed most is that they're out on the landscape of people who are educating on Canadian art. The numbers are very few, and it is in many ways something that needs to change, and that's something that the Art Canada Institute is working on very hard on changing, because unless people are able to have access to the stories of Canadian art and art history, it becomes really challenging to then develop an enthusiasm, a passion, an interest in the subject matter. And again, that's what we're all about. So with Kent Monkman's book, we did an interesting thing, is that we put much of the book in place in an online format. So it is available in an online content as well. I also wanted to talk to you a bit about other online education that has really inspired me and which I would recommend to you beyond the borders of Canada. And I would say that the number one place that I go to, and I would recommend that you go to if you want to learn more about art, it is unquestionably the Met timeline of art history. It is so broad, it is so extensive, and it is a work that has a piece of online education that has been in existence now really for over 20 years. Like, it's an incredible resource that is continuously updated, and it is a combination of essays, works of arts, and chronologies on art history. The essays, you can see that there are literally they're so numerous and on all subjects, and can be organized according to period, geographical region, theme. Art that you can go into, can see a work, and then have a short text on it. Another site that I go to a lot is the Getty Museum, and the Getty also, like the Met, has been a real pioneer on art education. You can see right on its website, the Getty is saying free materials for inspiration and for learning. So these sites are fantastic. The only limitations on these sites is that the amount of Canadian content that they have is absolutely minuscule. So while the Art Canada Institute was inspired by them, and while I would say you should definitely go to them to learn more, what you're not getting there is you're not getting that much Canadian content. The other thing is, on the Getty as well as the Met, there has not been an origination of online art books the way that we have created content, which is really to develop a canon of artists that one can look at online. Another absolutely fantastic place to go to learn about about international art history is the Walker Art Center, and it's a fantastic way to learn about art history, about artists. There is an access to over 2,300 artists, and also the Walker is always continuously building its offerings. In Europe, a fantastic place for learning about art online is the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam. And here you can see, actually, it's exciting, the Rijksmuseum is open, but there's a full opportunity to learn about the collection. My one thing that I would say, again, no Canadian art there, and also on this site, no really extensive learning, like book length learning, like the Art Canada Institute offers. And another really fantastic site that I wanted to share with you is this site called Art UK, which is a UK-based initiative, which allows one to learn about art from over 3,000 art venues in the UK. And you can see it's very, very geographically based. It doesn't go into as much depth in terms of places like the Walker Art Center or the Art Canada Institute does with our publications, but it is a great online resource. And I want to stress that the reason it is so important to have online learning and to really push online learning is that if it's in Canada, it makes what is art history a contemporary conversation. It is allowing people, it is the first step into learning about the art world. And although in many ways art education online has been not the quickest thing to come into realization up to this point in time, I think what we're going to see in the next probably 2 to 3 years is a dramatic increase in terms of the content that is available online. But what I would encourage you to do is please come and visit the Art Canada Institute site, because um, although we're going to see a big change in more content, um, the Art Canada Institute has been creating content now for 7 years, and so thank you for your time, and thank you for your interest in art education, and for being with me this evening.